Quick reminder before we get started on this episode. This podcast is based on my personal experiences and isn't medical advice. Have you ever wondered whether gluten digest enzymes actually work, especially if you have celiac disease or if you're highly gluten intolerant? I'm going to be sharing what the research says, what these enzymes are designed to do, and also our personal experience using them cautiously for accidental exposure. This is not about replacing a strict gluten-free diet. It's about understanding what these products can and cannot realistically do. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Gluten-Free Engineer podcast. I'm your host, Kiri Saunders. In 2011, I was diagnosed with celiac disease, a moment that changed everything. But I was determined not to let it hold me back. With my 2 engineering degrees, I set out to reverse engineer the gluten-free lifestyle, breaking down recipes, safety tips, travel hacks, and everything in between to rebuild a life I love. Whether you have celiac disease, gluten intolerance, or simply choose to live gluten-free, this podcast is for you. Join me each week as we simplify the gluten-free lifestyle, make it fun, and prove that you don't have to miss out on anything. Welcome back to the show. So if you're not familiar with it, there are gluten digest pills that are out there. You can find them probably in your common grocery aisle in the supplemental section, as well as in specialty health stores as well. So what they are is they're meant to help you digest gluten. Okay, so how does that work? Does that actually work? So basically, these are enzymes in a pill format that hopefully make it down into your stomach and actually still survive your digestive tract and all the things that come along with that, including stomach acid. Things can actually destroy things that you have eaten. And that's actually on purpose. It helps prevent us from getting diseases and things like that. So do gluten digest pills actually get in there and do anything? Can they actually help you digest gluten? Well, I have found that for someone with celiac disease, it is absolutely not recommended to use these to eat gluten. The golden standard remains a strict gluten-free diet for those with celiac disease. For those that are highly gluten intolerant, you also shouldn't be using these to actually purposefully eating gluten. Enzymes are not approved of treatments and are not proven to prevent intestinal damage or prevent symptoms. However, if you're using this as I might accidentally get cross-contaminated at this restaurant, it may be better than nothing at all. And we're going to talk about that. So don't be discouraged about these digest enzymes. They may actually help you depending upon the situation that you're in. So gluten is hard to digest. Let's just start with that because it contains proline-rich peptides, and human digestive enzymes do not fully break these down. And in celiac, fragments trigger an autoimmune response. So even if an enzyme breaks down some gluten, the question is whether it breaks down enough, fast enough, and completely enough to prevent immune activation. That's where things can get complicated with these gluten digest pills. They are meant to be a backup resource, really. They're not meant for, and I want to stress this a lot in this podcast episode, they're not meant for purposely eating gluten. So one thing we need to know about these two is they're over-the-counter supplements. They're not regulated like medications. There's definitely evidence out there, I did some research on this, that it does not support them as a substitute for a gluten-free diet. And some of these enzyme compounds studied in clinical trials show promise under controlled conditions. So there is some scientific evidence that this can help in some situations. So don't be too distraught over the fact that they may not help at all. At this point, enzymes are not recognized as a treatment for celiac disease, but they can help you in your process and in your situation and in your life. So that being said, I do want to share our personal experiences with our use of gluten digest pills. We remain 100% strict as much as possible with a gluten-free diet. We do not purposely ingest gluten at all in our family. We are all celiac, and it's just not something that we are willing to do or risk because we know that it can cause immediate issues as well as long-term health issues. We do not use these enzymes to eat gluten intentionally, as I mentioned. And I want to kind of stress that. I know I may have repeated it, but it's very important to know this. I don't want you to take this as you can use these to eat gluten intentionally. However, We do use these when we're eating out at restaurants, especially when we're traveling and we're not familiar with the restaurant and it's not dedicated gluten-free. We use these in situations where cross-contact risk could exist, but we've already done our due diligence to make sure that the restaurant is very careful. So we don't use this typically at like a restaurant that we haven't asked the right questions from. So, and we have episodes on how to ask the right questions when you go to a restaurant. So it's not when we've gone to some place and that might be lackadaisical on their gluten. This is when we go to a place that we're not familiar with. We know they make, good efforts on making sure our food is gluten-free. This is our just in case somebody's made a mistake in the kitchen and touched gluten to our dish somehow. And we also sometimes use this after a suspected accidental exposure. So when we use this in a restaurant, we typically will take 1 or 2 pills before a meal, eat the meal, and take 1 or 2 after. I kind of like to sandwich our food with the gluten digest pills if we're at a place, like I said, that we're not 100% sure if they're going to really treat our food right. That can help your body digest the gluten, at least that we have found in our experience. There have been times where some of us haven't taken the gluten pills and we've all eaten basically the same thing at the same restaurant, and some had symptoms and some didn't. Sure, it could be coincidence. It could also be the gluten digest pills. I look at it as in it can't hurt me to use these as a backup measure because they're not going to give me a gluten reaction and they don't bother my body. So I might as well take it just in case I do accidentally get gluten. It might help me. I've also taken them, and our children have taken them too, after we know we've gotten some accidental exposure. Now, it did not take all of our symptoms away, but it did honestly seem like from our, experience, absolutely not, scientific or clinical here, but from our experience, it did seem to help minimize and reduce the symptoms that we had. So we feel like they have reduced the severity of symptoms when we've been exposed. They do not eliminate it, and it's not there necessarily to protect it, but to possibly reduce the severity of it. So I want you to make sure you're keeping that in mind, that it can help you. It's not an end-all be-all, though. It can help that reducing the reduction of your symptoms, but it doesn't necessarily protect from intestinal damage. So this is something that we only do when we're traveling to places that we are not sure of. And I want you to make sure that you know, especially if you're celiac, feeling better does not necessarily mean the damage didn't occur. This is why this is not a free pass. This is why this is only used in those special situations like I'm talking about. So how can they actually help if they do actually help? And there's some scientific evidence that it can help. They help break down some gluten before it reaches the small intestine. It can reduce that total peptide load on you. It can sometimes help you with FODMAP type carbohydrate components in wheat that can help you feel a bit better. It also can just be a placebo effect, which is not necessarily fake. It's a real symptom improvement. Even if you feel like something's going to make you feel better, many times it will because of the placebo effect, which is, not a bad thing. And the fact that you do feel better. But again, if you have celiac, it could be causing still some intestinal damage. That's why I want to be very cautious and careful with my words on this podcast episode. I'm not claiming that as an end-all be-all, but it can be a supportive system in your life when you do want to travel, when you want to go to that restaurant that you're pretty sure is safe, but just in case you want to take a digest pill. And then if you are considering using enzymes, it is definitely worth discussing with your doctor, especially if you have confirmed celiac disease. If you do get these digestive enzymes, I highly recommend you get a high quality of them. We all know that when we skimp on quality, many times that means it's not going to be as effective. So we do get these from our specialty natural food store here. I find those work really well, and I found that they generally help us out. There is also a digest spectrum pill that we get sometimes. I mentioned before on our podcast episode that I am sensitive to soy, and that one actually does seem to help me if I get a little bit of soy in my system. So I want you to be, talking to your doctor about this. If you have celiac or high gluten intolerance and you need to be gluten-free, whether it's a good idea for you to use in those situations that are slightly risky and whether it's a good fit for you. And then I want to emphasize too, this is a personal decision territory. This is not medical prescription territory. Again, these are over-the-counter supplements. There is question whether these enzymes actually make it through your stomach acid. So that's why I recommend that we are using gluten digest pills that are high quality. We want to make sure that the outside of that pill can tolerate your stomach acid and make it to where it needs to be, later on in the digestive system, closer to the small intestine and in the small intestine, to help you be able to digest any accidental gluten that you get in there. So take this as a caution. This is possibly something that could help you in your celiac or gluten-free journey. But again, talk to your doctor about it. Experiment with it if they feel like it's worth you experimenting with. Again, do not eat gluten on purpose. This is the just in case my server or the kitchen staff made a mistake and cross-contaminated, toasted my bun on a griddle that had gluten on it. Things like that, where we're talking about minuscule, little tiny pieces of potential gluten that we're trying to combat, not, large amounts of gluten here. Really tiny micro bits of gluten is what we're trying to combat with these digestive enzymes. From our family's experience, they do seem to help us, but this is a personal choice. This is something you also need to talk with your doctor about. And I hope this helps open your eyes to potential, things that you could be doing to be proactive with your eating so that you can also enjoy life. We don't want to feel like we can never go out to eat. We want to do those researches on the safest gluten-free options when we go out to eat. Dedicated gluten-free is obviously the most safe. And then ones that have, great prep and segregation rules in their kitchen is very helpful whenever you're celiac or highly sensitive. So start with those restaurants. And then if you have to go to one where you think they're going to do okay, maybe the digest pills will also add in to help protect yourself. But again, talk with your doctor, make your best judgment, make your best decision for you. And hopefully this helps you have a better, more experienced life. Enjoy food out with your family and your friends. And just to reiterate, the biggest mindset shift for me was I don't use enzymes to make unsafe food feel safe. I use them cautiously as a backup layer, never a replacement for being strict with my gluten-free diet. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Gluten-Free Engineer. If you found value in this story, please share it with someone who might need encouragement on their own gluten-free journey. For more tips, recipes, resources, and even links to my YouTube channel, head on over to theglutenfreeengineer.com. It's your one-stop hub to make gluten-free living simple, fun, and full of flavor. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on an episode. And we will see you next week. The Gluten-Free Engineer podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I share my personal experiences and stories about living with celiac disease and navigating a gluten-free lifestyle. This podcast does not provide medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for medical questions, concerns, or advice specific to your health. This episode is brought to you by Find Me Gluten-free, your go-to app for discovering safe, gluten-free dining options wherever you go. Whether you're traveling or just looking for a new local spot, this app helps you find restaurants with gluten-free options, read reviews from other gluten-free diners, and avoid risky places, just like our family has used this app for many years. And here's the best part. Just for the Gluten-Free Engineer listeners, you can get an exclusive $5 discount on a premium membership. Head on over to theglutenfreeengineer.com/Find Me Gluten-free or check the show notes to grab your deal and make dining out stress-free, because eating out gluten-free shouldn't be a guessing game.